screen starts glowing and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the is a good score.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Goods, a film podcast. This is the 232nd episode of our podcast, and yet it is in some ways unprecedented because we have a guest on that we have never had on the podcast before. And that is a man named Mitch Capps, who is an active member on our Discord. He has his own podcast entitled The Movie Call Podcast, which I am a regular listener of and quite enjoy. And he's here with us tonight. Mitch.
I can't believe it. I feel like I've ascended into third heaven between listening to you guys for 100 plus episodes and palling around in the Discord. This is crazy stuff.
Yes, Mitch has been very vocal on the Discord the last few weeks and has just taken a deep dive into the podcast, been listening back through our episodes, kind of going backwards, back into territory that we scarcely even remember, but he's got a running commentary on the Discord, and I really appreciate that, because rare's the time that anybody we didn't know previously finds the Discord, finds the podcast, but especially finds the Discord, and on top of that takes an active role. So I'm pleased as punch. Welcome, Mitch. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, the podcast is great, and it's binge-worthy, and if there was a trailer, could put binge-worthy in quotes, and then my name hyphenated beside that. I will go on the record saying that I can't stop listening. But about me, there's not much to say. I'm just a regular guy. I'm 32. I live in the Southeast United States. I've been married for 8 years. I've got a little girl who's 3. And disappointed in myself, but pretty proud of the people around me.
Tell us a little bit about your podcast, Mitch.
Yeah, so I've got a buddy that I grew up around, and we grew up in a pretty small town, about 8,000 people. And he would always bring me over to screen some really obscure movies, and he became someone whose recommendations I could trust. And since we now live in different states, it's gotten to where we call each other on the phone, and pretty much every time we get on the phone, whatever we're talking about in life, we're filtering it through the lens of movies we've seen. That's how we communicate these ideas to each other. And so since we've been doing that every morning for a while, we decided to start recording it. So calling it a podcast is a little bit of a stretch, but we record our phone calls every morning and just talk about what we've been watching.
I really enjoy how conversational your podcast is. I mean, it's literally a conversation. So, conversational is right. You don't need to be hard on yourself. You said you were disappointed in yourself a minute ago. And I would say you've been a shining light for me listening to your podcast and for us here now to share with us your love of a certain director whom we will be speaking about tonight. And that is the director named Paul Thomas Anderson. He's made 10 feature-length narrative films. We're going to be talking about him overall tonight, but through the lens specifically of his 1996 debut film, Hard 8, starring Philip Baker Hall as Sidney, as well as John C. Reilly, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Samuel L. Jackson as the 4 main players of this. So I have a lot of thoughts. I thought it would be fun to have you on, Mitch, for this episode because one thing I learned from your podcast is that you and your co-host Sam, who I feel like I've gotten to know, even though the only actual exchange I've ever done with him has been in a YouTube comment. So I've never heard his voice other than him talking to you, or ordering coffee, which is a recurring bit on your podcast. He orders a coffee or picks up groceries in the middle of the episode. That you guys both have this strong connection to P.T. Anderson. So maybe we can start by just saying like what our history with the director is prior to this week, and then if we watched a little bit more this week. But Mitch, I'd kind of like to open the floor to you. Tell us about P.T. Anderson. If I'm someone who likes movies and somehow lived in a very specific shaped vacuum where I had never heard of P.T. Anderson, how would you pitch P.T. Anderson to me?
Well, sure, I'll try. It's gotten to a place where he's become one of the, I don't know, film bro directors. So it's a little bit more difficult to define the kind of person you're talking about. But I was one such person in my small town. And it wasn't my co-host, in fact, that introduced me to him, but just the older brother of one of my close friends. And to me, he's someone who seems like he's setting out to make a masterpiece every single time he makes a movie. He doesn't pull any punches. He's clearly in conversation with some of the great film canon, and he makes big pictures that are sweeping, that are epic, but he also makes small pictures. I think he makes classically trained type pictures, but also improvisational jazz type pictures. So he's something special.
Brian, we've discussed one P.T. Anderson film on the podcast. I don't know if Mitch has gotten around to that episode yet. I'd like to talk a little bit about this movie, but we do have a whole episode about it already. And what movie is that, Brian?
So we watched Boogie Nights, which, if I understand correctly, was kind of the breakout. So Hard Eight, the icebreaker, the debut feature, but the one that really put him on the map was perhaps Boogie Nights. At least maybe you can shine some more light on that. But that was one where I had actually been reading about the historical moment that film depicts, which is called porno chic. This moment when porn films had like a brief time of critical praise and respect. Like they were films, and there was bleed over between the realm of like cinema and pornography. And like, would real sex make films more real? And there were, big names in the cinematic scene that were considering this question. And like the Hays Code had fallen, and what could be depicted in film? Like, did there need to be artificiality, or where does that boundary between good taste and things that transgress lie? And when I was reading about this, I saw discussed in Boogie Nights. And I looked up Boogie Nights on like Putlocker and watched it. And I didn't really know anything about it. And it was a revelation. It's like, this movie was way better than I expected it to be. I gave it an 8 on our podcast. And a lot of that may have been, I just didn't have any expectations. And it was a positive experience. It had John C. Reilly. This one that we're primarily covering today has John C. Reilly. So, surprise.
So, Mitch, I feel like I either heard you say on the podcast or in one of our swap messages that Boogie Nights is one of the only, if not the only, PTA you have not seen. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's the only one I haven't seen. I get a little gun shy on films that are set in the pornographic industry. And so that's what's kind of kept me away from it. I think of myself as a Hays Code apologist. Other people think of me as just a good old-fashioned prude. But I like the way you spoke about that, Brian. Does the film really interrogate some of those ideas? Does it really discuss that point in film history in a meaningful way?
I think it does depict that moment in history in a meaningful way. We talked in our episode that it's very kind to its characters. Like, everybody basically is depicted as a good person, with the exception of one of the, like, producer characters. One of the people behind the scenes of the, like an executive is a really bad guy. But everybody else, it's like, these are just normal people doing what they do. Artists of a sort, and just, getting by. And, I mean, I find there is a lot that's funny. What's really masterful about it is it does these long takes, these long uncut shots. And those are impressive no matter what you're talking about. But, like, the opening shot of the movie of Boogie Nights is a disco party, because it's the 70s. And, like, the camera starts outside the disco nightclub and then flies in through the door of the disco nightclub. And you meet all the key characters in this party that's going on in the disco club, and the camera's like flying through, and it'll pause at each pair of characters for like 10 seconds and then glide on. And then they do that trick like 5 times over the course of the movie, and there's one where I think the camera even jumps in the pool like La La Land, and it blows my mind every time. And he was like 26 or something, young director, so very like mechanically, materially impressive what they were able to do with their tech and their gear.
So, yeah, I think look, I have many reaction thoughts to all of this. I will say I agree with most of what Brian said, but I also think what's interesting about Boogie Nights is it's not like, it doesn't separate entirely that this is like about sex and porn. It's like the thinking about what sex means to these characters is part of it too. And my favorite character, or at least like dramatically speaking, my favorite character, maybe not the most fun to watch, is the mom, who is played by Julianne Moore, who is always great whenever she plays a mom. So I don't know. I mean, I think your hesitation, it's pretty frank.
It's fairly explicit too, so like there is quite a bit of nudity and sex scenes.
But Brian, you also called out some interesting things about this movie, and Mitch did as well, that I kind of see as pulling P.T. Anderson movies together. So I want to share some of my overarching thoughts too about P.T. Anderson, but before we do, maybe we can just say what we have seen. So I'll go ahead and say that we delayed this episode a couple of times because of just scheduling. And we're recording this on a Monday night. On Wednesday, I had seen 3. On Wednesday, I watched Punch Drunk Love. On Thursday was Thanksgiving. On Friday, I woke up, my kids were playing, my wife was doing puzzles. I was like, all right, I'm just going to watch There Will Be Blood. And so I sat and watched There Will Be Blood while I was mostly paying attention to it. I was doing 1 or 2 other things. And then that finished, and I was like, all right, I'm going to turn on The Master. So I watched The Master. And at that point, I only had 3 left that I hadn't seen. So the past 2 days, I watched the other 3 too. So I have now seen at least once all of the P.T. Anderson movies. The one asterisk on that is I have not seen Magnolia since college. So we're talking pushing 20 years now. Not quite 20 years.
He can't keep getting away with this.
I wasn't going to, but then we delayed it a couple times, so.
Yeah, okay. I feel like Dan has been pulling the strings so that he could orchestrate this coup of watching all the Anderson films. So before this week, I had seen Boogie Nights, obviously. Also, There Will Be Blood. Also, Punch Drunk Love. But I'm pretty sure that's it. And the assignment for this week was to watch Hard 8, the debut feature, and to watch one other one, at least, that we hadn't seen before. So, Dan, you are the consummate completionist, and it seems like you are now complete. What about you, Mitch? Which P.T. Anderson films have you seen?
So, yeah, I've pretty much seen them all. I say pretty much because I know he has like a handful of shorts and little things, music, video type things. But it's been a minute since I've seen a few of them, although some of them I've seen a half dozen times. There Will Be Blood, Punch Drunk Love and Magnolia. Others I've seen once. I saw his most recent one in theaters, One Battle After Another. That was one of three of his that I saw in theaters. I did watch an extra one, which was the concept I think that became Heart Eight, Coffee and Cigarettes, which was available on YouTube in a pretty bad copy, but thought it was interesting.
Is that a short or a feature length?
Yeah, it's like 20 minutes, so short, I think.
Okay. And Brian, did you end up watching another one?
The extra one I watched was the new one that you hyped up, One Battle After Another. You said contender for Best Picture, perhaps, certainly, probably quite a few Oscar noms.
I mean, I think that's the odds makers have that the at least multiple nominations a guarantee, and it's a heavy favorite for Best Picture. But we're right around the time when the narratives get shaken up. So like, it could be an Oppenheimer situation where it's just like, okay, it's the favorite for the whole year. Everybody's saying it's going to win and it wins. Or it could be like most other years where it seems like, oh, it looks like it's going to be this one. Like The Power of the Dog, people thought was going to win in 2021 for most of the year. And then, what was it, Coda? Something came in the last couple weeks. So, there's plenty of years. La La Land to Moonlight, Social Network to The Artist. Was that the same year? I can't remember. So there's always ones that sneak in.
That was King's Speech.
I predict it probably will win Best Picture. I feel like there's one or two other possibilities, but it's just gotten rave reviews, and it's kind of like he's at this phase where, I'm pretty sure he didn't win for There Will Be Blood, and I think that was the closest he got. He might have, I think Phantom Thread was a Best Picture nominee. I don't know if any others were nominees, but he's never like taken home the big prize. So I think part of the reason that One Battle After Another is a candidate is like, it's like, all right, this is the moment, it's got big stars, it got big buzz, it got tremendous reviews. It's kind of a film of the moment in a way that many of P.T. Anderson's movies are not of the moment,
Yeah. So I'm sure we'll talk about it some more. I think it's cool that it had Leo in it, because when we talked Boogie Nights, we discussed that somebody who had been in discussion for the part of Dirk Diggler was not Mark Wahlberg, but young Leonardo DiCaprio. But he starred in a different movie in 1997. And we talked about how the timelines could have been different. And then actually in like the last 18 months, there were interviews with Leonardo DiCaprio where he said, I've always regretted not taking Boogie Nights with Paul Thomas Anderson, which is kind of crazy. I mean, I think he took the right path in the moment when he faced the moment. But now he's working with Paul Thomas Anderson, so that's cool.
So I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the distinctive things about a Paul Thomas Anderson movie. One thing I like that Mitch said is that he makes every movie, or he tries to make every movie, a masterpiece. And I feel like that's mostly true. You also said he makes big movies and small movies. What are his small movies? I don't know if he actually has small movies. I mean, some of them are like more intimate and tight, like Punch Drunk Love. And I would say this is probably his smallest movie. But none of his movies are like tossed off. They all are very deliberate and expansive in thematic scope and often in production scope. What I find interesting about him is he really feels to me in a way that I don't think any other director from his generation does. Like, he is a member of the previous generation. Like, he really feels like new Hollywood to me. Like, he's kind of equivalent to Martin Scorsese. Like, a lot of the things I would say about P.T. Anderson, I would also say about Scorsese. Very technically audacious and technically skilled as a filmmaker, but like bringing original ideas to filmmaking. And all of his films, except Punch Drunk Love, I don't know about When Heart 8 is supposed to be set, and then the new one, are looking back to some degree. And I would say Punch Drunk Love, the time period doesn't even really matter. It's only One Battle After Another that really feels like it's a film of the moment. A lot of his films feel like they're either like looking back or capturing some spirit of a time gone by, or like barely of this world to some degree. I don't know. Another thing about Paul Thomas Anderson is that he has pet actors, pet themes, pet structures, but it's a little different from Wes Anderson, because Wes Anderson, the other great Anderson of this generation, I'm sure there are other good Andersons too, but those are the two that come to mind for me. Pretty much every Wes Anderson movie, you get the full Wes Anderson experience, with the exception of he kind of has like the stop motion things to the side. But like every movie contains the totality of what a Wes Anderson picture is to me. But P.T. Anderson, the one guy we're talking about tonight, I don't think any one of his movies captures all of his pet themes and all of the things that he likes to do to make movies. Many of his movies, and I think like Magnolia is an example, which I'll just go ahead and say here, I know Mitch really likes, because on his podcast, he recently did a countdown of his top 25 favorite movies. And I think Magnolia was number 4 or 3 or 4 or 5, something like that. Is that right, Mitch?
Yeah, you got it 4.
And then your co-host had Magnolia at number 1. So like this was a formative movie for you. And that one like very much has the huge ensemble, the very split across different characters, kind of multiple things feeding together that you definitely see in Boogie Nights. You kind of see in One Battle After Another. It's not exactly the same, but then you compare that to like Punch Drunk Love, or even Licorice Pizza. So like Licorice Pizza is about 2 characters mainly. You get some of the people in their orbit, but it's not like designed as like this kind of sprawling cast feeding together. And then you also see like some of the themes, like many of his films deal with non-traditional families, or families where some aspect of the structure of the family is broken or inverted in some way. I don't know, I'll just say this here. Having binged P.T. Anderson this week, I get the sense that he's not a pleasant person to be around. His protagonists are almost always unpleasant people, and unpleasant men particularly. Another way that he's very New Hollywood is his films are very male and like dealing with male perspectives, which, you know, the majority of films that are made have male protagonists. That's like an imbalance that exists. But P.T. Anderson in particular feels like he's grappling with the notion of masculinity in many of his films. So I just kind of tossed a lot of stuff out there. But Mitch, what are some of your favorite things about P.T. Anderson? Favorite themes you look for, things that you kind of pull out from there?
Well, I feel like if there was one that kind of encapsulated his whole Rolodex of themes, it would be Magnolia. But I also feel like he kind of turned back on the ideology of Magnolia as he went along. I think he got a little more nihilistic, a little more callous. He grew up a little in some ways, for better and worse. I like the fact that you can see some of the things that recur throughout his movies. It also just feels like one movie for another is a different planet. I think I look at There Will Be Blood and Punch Drunk Love, and I can't really believe it's the same filmmaker. But I like what he's able to pull out of his actors. I don't know if anybody else is just hypnotizing their actors in the same way he does, and pulling out these show-stopping performances that kind of just make your heart beat in your chest when you watch them. There's a kind of stillness to them, but then the frenetic nature of everything else that's around them. I like how they feel like they are a music composition. I don't know if he's actually unpleasant to be around, but I love this. I think it was a Louis C.K. anecdote about meeting Paul Thomas Anderson, or maybe he got it secondhand, but he was talking about how you would find him on set just, telling fart jokes and cackling and being weird. And he made an analogy between him and the character Amadeus in the movie Amadeus, and how you look at this guy and you think, why did God give this guy this power? Just, but those are some of the things I like.
Yeah, it's really struck me how different each movie seems. Like, so I think when we talked Boogie Nights is when I realized that There Will Be Blood was also Paul Thomas Anderson. It's like, well, I don't think I've ever seen a Paul Thomas Anderson before. And then we talked about it. It's like, well, I did see There Will Be Blood. And then literally just now, I learned, okay, well, Punch Drunk Love is one. And I've seen that. But everyone has like a different vibe, a different genre, a different era often. But I can see that it is a common thread that it gets these strong performances from the actors. I mean, Punch Drunk Love has got Adam Sandler in this serious performance, and so I quite like that one. And then just this week, I was kind of fishing around for what is the other movie that I watch, and I started Phantom Thread also. And for a little while, I was going back and forth between Phantom Thread and One Battle After Another because I wasn't super into either of them. I settled on One Battle After Another because once it got going, I mean, it was kind of like a chase scene all the way to the end, so it did eventually grab me. I found Phantom Thread very slow, but just, it impressed me. We've got such a range of styles.
Yeah, he often works with great actors in the lead. Like, I kind of actually feel like Punch Drunk Love is a bit of an anomaly in that regard, because not that Sandler's not a great actor, but he's not an actor of stature. When you think great actor, Sandler doesn't come to mind, but who does come to mind? Daniel Day-Lewis, and he's had a couple of Daniel Day-Lewis movies. Joaquin Phoenix, who, Brian, I know you're a little cold on. I've found recently, now that I've seen a couple more Joaquin Phoenix movies, that I'm not actually sure I like his screen presence that much either, but like he's undoubtedly got like a intensity to him.
I'm mostly cold on Her. I did not like Her at all, but who knew it would be so prophetic? Now we're dealing with people dating their AIs, so I guess the director had his pulse on the world.
But yes, I mean, echoing you guys, almost all of his movies have just outstanding lead performances, and Magnolia doesn't even really have a lead performance, if I recall. I haven't seen it, like I said, in much more than a decade. But one of the nice things about that is you just have all of these great actors. It's like character actors, but then also like Tom Cruise and stuff in there. So yeah, no, I kind of agree with that for sure. The one interesting thing is I 100% agree, Brian, that how could the guy who made Punch Drunk Love make There Will Be Blood, make Licorice Pizza? Like, how could those be the same director? And yet, there's a certain quality to the films that unites them. There's like I don't know. It really struck me in Punch Drunk Love that it's almost like a great writer. Like if you have a writer you love, they could write a whole bunch of different stories, but you'll still always know, like you can still feel this is that writer, you know? And I get that feeling with P.T. Anderson's movies in a way that I don't for other directors. Like honestly, even like Richard Linklater, who's one of my favorites, he has a similar thing where like you can't say what is a Linklater movie because he's made 50 different movies in 10 different genres over the years, and genuinely like you would have trouble tying them together, except that most of them are good in my opinion. But there are a couple that are like very super Linklater-y that I think some people like have in mind, like the more Hangout vibe, like dissecting the notion of time passing. But like, I don't know, I think of him as a comparison as like a P.T. Anderson. All of his movies have a similar quality to them that I don't quite know exactly what it is. And all of them, to me, I had binging them this week, I had the reaction. I didn't know what to feel about almost any of them when I watched them. When the credits ran, I was like, I think I liked that more than I disliked that, but I don't know how much I liked it. Like, I feel like I need to see it again to process it. And oftentimes when I feel that way about something, it ends up being a favorite, but not always. So I don't know. Maybe I'll come to treasure Anderson as a favorite director in the years to come, or maybe I'll just never quite get him. I don't know. It's hard to say. Mitch, you said you had seen some of his movies in theaters. What were the 3 that you've seen in theaters?
So I saw Phantom Thread in theaters. I saw Inherent Vice theaters, and most recently, One Battle After Another. So that makes sense, kind of tracks with the time that I got into him. I missed The Master, I guess, in theaters, and Licorice Pizza. But he does good on the big screen, that's for sure.
Right. And that's another piece is he's a big time writer. He writes in, again, a way that's kind of distinct, and it feels sort of authorly to me.
Yeah, very literary.
Not in the normal way. So if you describe like filmmaking as literary, it evokes a slowness and like an ornateness that he sometimes has, but not always. But it has, like a literary quality to it. But he's also like very much a visual maestro, technician, but also like visionary. So I would like to see a movie of his on the big screen. I never have. I missed One Battle After Another on the big screen, but I also would love to have seen it, because didn't it go in like 70 or whatever, like the super IMAX stuff?
Yeah, it did. It'll probably circle back when the Oscar noms are announced.
Yeah. Movies are long too. Almost all of his movies are well over 2 hours, with only a couple exceptions.
Right.
Including tonight's. Tonight's is one exception. So we should probably get into it. And maybe we can thread in some of our thoughts. Any other overarching PTA thoughts before we dive in?
Oh, I've got one. So his father was the horror host Ghoulardi. And I just noticed watching One Battle After Another that at least one of the companies involved is Ghoulardi Films, Ghoulardi Productions.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
I knew there was no chance you weren't going to bring that up, Brian. One other thought, maybe, I don't know if it's worth mentioning. You mentioned Linklater, and I think that comparison is apt. It feels like a lot of Anderson's movies you can kind of pair off in the way you can with Linklater's. You can do the Before trilogy with Boyhood and his Rotoscope movies together, and Everybody Wants Some, and Dazed and Confused, and others like that. What was the recent one? Hitman with Bernie. But then, yeah, I think you can do that too with Anderson's. He's got a couple of Pynchon's. I don't know how you say that, but a couple of Thomas Pynchon adaptations he's done, and then Punch Drunk to me feels very much in line with Licorice Pizza, and who knows what else you pair together, but it feels like I think Brian said eras. It's like it feels that way. Go through these different eras where he has.
Yeah, I could see some similarities between Hard Eight and Boogie Nights, but then the other ones I checked out just felt very different.
So Hard Eight. 1996, I believe it came out. Paul Thomas Anderson was born 1970. So he was 26 when he made this movie. What were you doing when you were 26, Brian?
Oh gosh, contributing to earnthis.net.
That's right. Part of the P.T. Anderson mythology was that he was a wunderkind. And I think you see that reflected in at least a couple of his movies, like the notion of, what does it mean? Does one peak early, and what does that mean?
Oh, actually, when I was 26, I was making the New Orleans trip episode of Gauntlet with you, Dan.
Oh, great times. Bourbon Street, back when I would drink bourbon. That was a good trip, Brian.
It was.
And also that, so Anderson was a hotshot young director. Now, he actually came out of the Sundance scene, and this was an era in the 90s when many indie directors, like indie was cool. Like that was synonymous, indie and cool. And a lot of directors who like became regulars in Hollywood, some of them like ascended to A-list, but most of them hung around like the B-list, but like well-respected tier. So you got Steven Soderbergh, Tarantino, definitely A-list. Robert Rodriguez, we had. Linklater was part of that too. Aronofsky, P.T. Anderson. Wes Anderson was part of that. Coen brothers, I believe. Kevin Smith for sure. So a whole bunch. I think Alexander Payne, who made Sideways. Sofia Coppola might have also come up there, but maybe in the later 90s. So this whole wave of directors who are now kind of starting to enter their golden years, like maybe their youth is past, and so we're kind of getting their later age works. But I don't know. I kind of feel like we've talked a little bit about it, Brian, in the past, like these waves of directors that come up. It's like certain ecosystems or like zeitgeists get like a whole bunch of interesting voices at once. Like New Hollywood was an example where you had Scorsese, Coppola, Lucas, Altman, Spielberg, all these guys making movies, and then just like a bunch of them at the same time.
Yeah, I think a PTA is part of the same batch as Tarantino.
And I think Hard Eight, like a lot of people at the time thought an indie movie is something that is like Reservoir Dogs, you know? And then Pulp Fiction after that, like about criminals who are kind of losers.
Yeah, and I mean it's kind of the same thing also with the Coen brothers, where it's like a silly, bumbling criminal.
Right, for sure.
It's like parts are cool, but then you can kind of see through the veneer and things kind of slip and fall apart.
Well, I was surprised to find that Coffee and Cigarettes that I mentioned earlier, I think it was a Sundance submission and some kind of selection insofar as it got him something like a residency or a lab, I guess, where he could start to fully flesh out Hard Eight. And it wasn't very much in Coffee and Cigarettes that I could see, my untrained eye, that would become people to it. I was a little surprised. It was very simple.
I felt that way about Wes Anderson's short. He did Bottle Rocket as a short, which he then made into his debut. And like P.T. Anderson, Rushmore was his breakout afterwards. So, but this is a movie about, I said criminals. The extent to which they are criminals ebbs and flows. It's not centrally about a criminal enterprise, except it sort of does end up being so. We'll talk about it. But what it definitely is about gambling and gamblers. Brian, have we talked any gambling movies on the pod? I was trying to think and I couldn't come up with one, but we've talked about so many at this point. I'm sure there's one in there.
Yeah, I don't think, especially, except there was some gambling involved when we watched the Support Your Local Gunfighter. I don't know, that like the sequel to Support Your Local Sheriff, I feel like they were at a casino saloon type place, and there was a little bit, but it wasn't to this extent.
Well, that's significant, I think, to this movie because, I mean, gambling obviously shows up a lot in Westerns, but I think this movie has a lot of gambling and Western tropes.
Interesting. Mitch, tell us how you feel about gambling movies.
Well, it's probably my favorite archetype. It's a subgenre that I really gravitate to, and I think a lot about as to why, and I never quite really land on a clear answer, but I keep coming back to these movies. I feel like it's the imposter syndrome here. It's the literally me meme. You know, I like the lost soulness of it all. I feel like it's maybe some kind of cartoon version of my own addictive natures, or just the purest expression of what it means to win and to lose. I like the noir attitude it has, the nihilistic attitude it has, the this kind of false battle between false dark and false light. I love it. I love gambling movies.
You also put it all on the line.
You want your story to have stakes, and what is gambling but stakes?
Literally.
Oh, there you go. There's something.
So this movie opens with a tracking shot following a man walking to a coffee shop. And as he walks to this sort of grungy looking coffee shop, he sees a dirty, ragged looking surprise John C. Reilly, Brian.
Just a bum alone on a pile of bricks.
John C. Reilly, and this was either his debut or his first serious role. This is early John C. Reilly, and Reilly would appear in at least Boogie Nights and Magnolia. Was he in Punch Drunk Love? I can't remember.
I don't think so. I think he had a very funny cameo in Licorice Pizza as like a Frankenstein's monster.
Oh, yes, that's right. I remember that now.
What I'm taking from this discussion is I need to see Magnolia. I think I gotta watch that one. I don't know anything about it.
That's his best performance as far as I'm concerned.
Speaking of cameos in Licorice Pizza, Sean Penn was in Licorice Pizza. And then he's just like an insane person in one battle after another and might win an Oscar because of it.
Yeah.
With RFK Jr. hair and mannerisms and just out of control.
What's his name? PT's trying to kick back for the one that beat him. No Country for Old Men winning with the Javier Bardem bad haircut. Maybe he thinks that's the secret sauce.
That's the key. A lot of Oscars are won or lost by their prosthetics or their body shape changes. But yes, I like the movie opens. So this man who we're kind of following will learn is Sydney. And I like that his opening lines are, you want a cup of coffee? You want a cigarette? And then he invites him in. I'm a guy that's offering to give you a cigarette to buy you a cup of coffee. And I like that this is like P.T. Anderson inviting us into his world. Sort of. It's like, here, have a cigarette is not necessarily how I would welcome someone personally. But it's like a welcoming to my cinematic voice. You know, that's what P.T. Anderson is saying.
And so the actor who plays Sydney, what is his name?
Philip Baker Hall. Good actor.
Very.
I don't know him from, I was like, let me look it up, see if I know him from other stuff. But I was like, I feel like I should know this guy from 100 things, but do I know him from anything?
So that was exactly how I felt. I kept thinking it was Harvey Keitel. He's not Harvey Keitel, but it's the role that Harvey Keitel would have in a Quentin Tarantino movie. Because he's kind of this older authority figure in this weird underground behind the mirror world. But what I know this actor from is he played the director of the CIA, like everybody's boss in Argo.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking up his most seen films.
I was so sure you were going to call out Seinfeld, Brian.
Okay, wait. Was he Steinbrenner on Seinfeld?
I don't know the name, but he was like a library associate that was hyperbolized in a very funny way.
Okay.
Apparently he was in The Truman Show as network executive, so probably a small role. But he was in Zodiac, Magnolia, Boogie Nights. Who was he in Boogie Nights? Floyd Gundali. Who's Floyd Gundali in that, Brian?
So I didn't even remember. I saw that in the credits on Wikipedia. And I was like, I don't remember that role.
Huh.
Although humorously, that name is in this movie.
Wait, really?
Mm-hmm. When Jimmy, which we'll get to later, is listing off former associates of Sydney, he mentions that name as well as the character name that he plays in Magnolia.
Huh.
I think, Dan, it might be the character who comes in and pitches the video business.
Okay.
when he's like, it's not about film anymore. It's going to be about home video. And Burt Reynolds, like, kicks him out.
So my wife and I just watched The Talented Mr. Ripley for the first time. I had never seen it before. I thought it was awesome. I loved it.
It's a trip.
The cast in that movie is insane. But it has...
Gwyneth Paltrow, no less.
Exactly. It has Gwyneth Paltrow. It has Philip Seymour Hoffman. And it has Philip Baker Hall in it. And I was doing the Leo point. Because I was like, it's another Hard Eight actor. We're going to be talking about Hard Eight. Because Philip Baker Hall only shows up at the very end. I was like, oh my God, it's complete. We have 3 of the 5 most memorable people in this movie.
Now I just wish John C. Reilly had showed up in Talented Mr. Ripley.
Dude, that would have been a blast, yeah.
Philip Baker Hall is also really great in an Altman movie called Secret Honor. It's kind of a one-man show where he plays Richard Nixon, President Nixon. And it's pretty good.
I have a confession. I've never seen a Robert Altman film. I know I need to correct that, though, because like half of my favorite directors, when you read their bio, is like took inspiration from Robert Altman. I was like, okay. Anyways, Philip Baker Hall. So he's kind of like the lead here. In fact, I would say he is the lead. And just as Mitch was saying earlier, really outstanding performance. A little bit mannered or something. He kind of has like if you've seen Pulp Fiction, the way that the wolf is like very professional in the face of an environment of like losers and F-ups.
And who plays the wolf?
There you go, Keitel, right?
Yeah, I think it's Keitel.
Necessarily, unlike the wolf, he cracks on occasion, which is helpful.
And John C. Reilly, who plays John, that's the character's name too, and Sydney, who is Philip Baker Hall, open with this conversation. And the structure of this movie is kind of interesting because it's like, it feels kind of like 3 parts, although it's really like 6 to 8 long scenes or like sequences, you might say. It's like a couple scenes strung together. It's got like it almost felt written almost like a play, but it's definitely not a play, where you have like discrete chunks of the film. It's very, very act driven, I found. I don't know. But basically, John C. Reilly, who's already like in this first scene, A, good, and B, funny. I found, so I watched it this week again, and it was my second time watching it. And I had forgotten how funny this movie is. It's actually, that's another P.T. Anderson thing, is he like weaves humor in with darkness. And there is, it's kind of a sad gambling movie, but also made me laugh a lot, particularly some of John C. Reilly's delivery. There's one later when we get to the hotel room that just had me doubled over laughing the way that he says it. But so Brian, you're an avowed Reilly fan, is that right?
Yeah, I'm a big John C. Reilly fan, so I like this. Just overall, I like this movie. I think he's good in it. And yeah, he's got this sweet presence, and then as dark things start to happen, he's still like the dopey good guy, and just watching him bumble through the things, I was charmed.
And he's skeptical of Sydney at first, and then just kind of warms up to him. He's like, I'm not going to go with you. And he's like, accuses him of wanting to like have sex with him or something. He's like, I'll come with you, but I'm only going to sit in the back seat. And then we do a smash cut, and he's sitting up in the front seat, chatting with him, like asking for cigarettes.
And he has some neuroses. Like he won't light a cigarette with a match because of an incident where a box of matches spontaneously combusted or combust, I don't know, in his pocket at a movie.
And then we flash back to it. When we flash back to it, I was like, all right, lock it in. Brian likes this movie. I don't care what else happens. Brian's in on this movie.
I was so glad that they shot that scene, because they didn't have to. I mean, he was telling the story, but then they decided to show us too.
It's like a 4-second cutaway.
And I should have sued the match company.
The idea is he had matches in his pocket and they lit up. And everything about the way he describes it, it's a great marriage of well-written dialogue, very, very well delivered. So
Yeah, but also the cutaway, how brief it was and how disruptive it was to what you were saying earlier, are essentially like 6 to 8 major sequences. And just the non sequitur nature of it, I liked it. I liked the moment. I liked the story. I would keep it. But it, to me, starts to show his cards a little bit as being a younger director. You see the Kind in the Wunder there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's funny. This is a much more minimal and restrained film than Boogie Nights. And Boogie Nights has like a bunch of moments where I felt, okay, he's just showing off. He's just doing a thing because he had an idea. Mitch, you recently wrote in a review about Sorry Baby that someone should have killed your darlings. That's a phrase for writers of like, or creators of all ilk, but I've heard it in the context of writing. But like, force yourself to let go of the thing that you personally think is cool if it doesn't actually improve the product or the story of what you're creating. And I definitely think this one has maybe a couple of those, like maybe what you're saying about that cutaway. Did it actually improve the movie? Well, it made me laugh, but like, did it do much to improve the tone and flow? And in fact, maybe cut away from this very narrow focus. Maybe you could make the argument. Boogie Nights has more of those, but yeah.
I would keep it, and it reminds me of something, especially in the context of what you're saying. I can't remember who it was. It was, I think, a musician of some stripe, but they were saying, "Oh, you shouldn't write a memoir until you're 40." And I always hated that idea because I think, I know I want the things that you can only access, that you can only deliver on when you're young, when you're a kid. I don't want to lose that stuff. I think you need that, and I think there's a point of no return with it too. So whatever he was up to, I don't think I would trade it.
Yeah. It reminds me of Bruce Springsteen's early albums, his first two, where just like seeing someone young excited about the world and like their craft and like whoa, I can say things and I have all these things running through my head that I want to say and do is infectious, even if it's undisciplined, Although this is a pretty disciplined film, I gotta say. But what Sidney does is he brings John to... I'm so glad that John C. Reilly is John. I don't need to cross-reference characters and actor names, which I mess up pretty much every episode. I'll call one the other. But anyways, he takes John to a casino. I forget. I think they start in Vegas, or do they start in Reno? I felt like at one point it shifted between the two of them, but I could be wrong on that.
Don't they drive back to Vegas from Jack's Diner?
Yeah, I think that's right. And when they're there, so John C. Reilly is, he's homeless, he's poor, and he's like, well, what I really want to do is bury my mom who recently died, but I don't have any money to do it. And Sidney's like, well, let me just help you get started by like, I'll get you a meal. I'll get you settled. And what does he do? He takes him to a casino, of course, exactly the place where you achieve financial stability, a casino. But he teaches him a rate card scam, which is not something you could do in 2025. I had to watch this. I rewound and watch it again. And I think I get it. He's not actually making money. He's basically buying chips one time, but only making it look like he's putting more money into the system. So he's not actually pulling more money out and like pocketing $500 or anything, but he's making the casino think he's putting in lots of money. So then they'll comp him a room. They'll comp him because they want him to keep coming back because they think he's burning ridiculous amounts of money at the casino. But it's almost like a mini heist thing because it does it like the Ocean's movie where they narrate what you're going to do as we cross cut to seeing him actually do it with the narration on top of it, which that's kind of what I was thinking.
Interesting. I was thinking about James Holzhauer on Jeopardy, who is the only high-profile gambler that I know a little bit about them and their personality. He was a guy who won 40 straight games of Jeopardy, and actually I don't think it was that many. It was 30. But he got a lot of notoriety because he would make these big wagers on the Daily Doubles, and he would just run up these totals that you never see on Jeopardy. He was winning $100,000 an episode, which is you got to get everything on the board basically, and then get the double and double it.
Wow.
But his career, his job was he was a professional gambler. And he talked a little bit about how that works. And so I thought that was kind of just what we were seeing in these scenes. I didn't clock that it was a scam. I thought it was just if you play it smart, if you're thoughtful about what you're doing, and you take advantage of these comps that they give you, and you're not buying alcohol all the time, that you can actually make a return doing this.
Yeah, I can only imagine that Sydney is doing things that are similar in nature to this, which, as Dan points out, doesn't actually make you any money. I don't ever really figure out in the movie how he is a professional gambler, Sydney, because we see this scam and then we see him, I think, lose a major bet later. And I don't know what he's got going on that he's then able to pass on to John to help him get stable.
I was thinking about that too. I was like, is he actually making enough money as a gambler that it's he can be this functioning member of the gambling community? But there's one point where John is kind of bragging about a big win that Sydney had. He's like, yeah, he had to dump 4,000 into it, but he walked away with 36,000.
I thought that was about somebody else.
Oh, was it? I thought it was about Sydney, but maybe it was someone else. Maybe you're right. But I think what we're hitting at is, to me, one of the most interesting things about this movie, which is how should we feel about Sydney? Because he is very kind to the people that we like. And I would say very kind in general up until the very final act of the film, where we'll talk about what's going on there. And he is definitely acting in a fatherly sort of way. He's a guiding force.
Right. Paternal.
Yes. And then he's pretty clearly a gambling addict. And this is his life, as he just goes and plays cards every day and runs the slots and whatever every day. And that, for someone who I don't know, to me personally, that feels kind of sad for someone who is this kind of force of wisdom and guidance, but then he seems to not really be doing much. I don't know, but maybe it does seem to be sort of a contrast of, if you were to zoom out, he seems like a kind of pathetic person, and when you zoom in, he seems like a very kind person. But that was my read on it. I don't know. What are you thinking at this point, Mitch, about Sydney?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about this guy. To me, it wasn't as obvious as it was to you that he was a gambling addict. I get that this haunting of the casinos is something he does because it's sort of this liminal space, he's running from something. Casinos famously, I think, have no clocks. This is a place outside of time where he's going to while away his hours, where he can eke out an existence but never get too far ahead. And the thing that sort of shakes that up is his encounter with John and then Clementine.
Yeah, and he has kind of this personality, this moral code that he seems to adhere to, that there really can be honor among thieves. I mean, as you said, it's not clear that they're involved in any kind of criminal enterprises until there's kind of a pivot point partway through, but there's nothing illegal in this place about gambling. You can gamble. That's a thing you can do, and if you're smart about it, maybe you can make some money, but he just has principles, and not everybody in this scene has the same principles that he has.
That's a good point. I think too, you got to think about someone who has principles and think of someone who's as unjudgmental as he is. Whenever I meet someone like this, or whenever I find myself capable of behaving like this, it's when I'm cognizant of my own errors, my own wrongdoings. That's when I'm able to have a disgust for wickedness. That's when I'm able to see wickedness in someone else and forgive it. It's as if I have something haunting me. And so I sort of get that impression about him, and I guess that plays out too.
I kept thinking of the character Mike on Breaking Bad, the old hitman slash cleaner who he's always like one step ahead. He's always knowledgeable and professional, and he often gets to make these monologues about how you can be a criminal but still be principled.
I am so glad that I'm on an episode where you're referencing Breaking Bad because I feel like I'm getting all the hits.
Yeah, before we started, I was saying that Mitch has clipped all his box tops. He's, he's got all his proofs of purchase and sent away for the t-shirt. And so now here he is, part of the goods proper.
Sweepstakes, baby.
I've got that thing you do in the chamber. Don't worry. I'm holding it. And so I'll share something here, which is that my great uncle, my mom's uncle, was a gambling addict and lost his house, his job, and his family due to his inability to stop gambling and racking up debts. And because of that, my mom was very, very anti-gambling. So for me, it was like morally bad to gamble. The same way I like smoking. It was like if you've done that, you have done something dangerous to you, Not to say, you can't ever have a cigarette. Like I've never had a cigarette, but some of my brothers have had cigarettes, and not to say you can't play a $50 game of poker with your buddies, or if you can like use the slots, $20, if it's controlled. It's not like absolutist about it, but like it's not good basically. And I don't know. I was watching, I've talked about how I like listening to the two Green brothers, Hank Green and John Green. I read their books and watch their videos. And Hank Green has talked about that he does not like gambling in the sense of treating it as an industry because it doesn't really provide like a net positive. It's just like money moving back and forth with companies skimming off the top and like a couple people or like a small percentage of people losing tremendous amounts of money is basically his argument.
I think, yeah, that's essentially wise. You bringing the family history into it makes me think of my great grandmother who told me a story a year or so ago about her grandfather, her maternal grandfather, who ran a poker game in the back of his store, she said. And she said that one night a guy came in and gambled his whole life away, like everything. And he knew that this gentleman had a wife and children. And so he released him from his debts, closed down his game. And she was telling me all this to the end of why she grew up not being allowed to even play cards, whether it was for money or not. And I thought that was kind of interesting. You get sometimes wind of something that feels puritanical or legalistic, but then usually if you trace it back far enough, there's some kind of personal experience that's led someone to steer totally clear of something, and that makes a lot of sense.
We jump ahead in time in the movie after again. It's again. I was really struck with the irony of like, I'm going to get you settled. And the way I'm going to get you settled is we're going to go to a casino and I'm going to like introduce you to all the gambling you can do here. But we do jump ahead, and John C. Reilly seems to be like in this sort of little circle of people who hang out around the casinos. Are they in Reno at this point? Has this jumped to a different setting, or are they still in Vegas at this point? I thought they were in Reno because at one point they talked about your old connections in Vegas and going to Vegas, but it was a little ambiguous for me. But they're sort of established. They know the people around town, the different casinos and all that, and they know some of the people who frequent it, including the waitresses. And so we meet a waitress who serves Sydney, and it's played by Gwyneth Paltrow, a character named Clementine, although Samuel L. Jackson pronounces it later Clementine, which I thought was funny and kind of showed his carelessness. But it's Clementine because they're like the movie My Darling Clementine. Is that a John Ford?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So one thing that struck me about this movie is it seemed to take a really long time to get started, to me. Or like, I don't know, to figure out what it was about. And so what runtime would you say Gwyneth Paltrow shows up for the first time?
Half hour?
Oh, I would say less than that. I would say around 15 minutes, maybe a couple minutes before.
Okay. I would have to go to the tape. It seemed like a long time to me.
It did to me too.
So John going to the casino, I was thinking, okay, well, something's going to go wrong here. Like, you know, he's being ushered into this den of vice by this mysterious man. He's going to teach him to be a gambler. Okay, well, something's going to go wrong. And like, he's going to, I don't know what's going to happen. He's going to ask him to do something that he's not comfortable with, or he's going to lose a lot of money. And like, that just keeps not happening. And then we introduce, okay, this new character, this Gwyneth Paltrow waitress, who Sydney is very paternal towards. And so I was just wondering, okay, well, is something's going to go wrong. Something's going to happen, and we're going to have conflict. Because up to this point, which to me felt like 30 minutes, I don't know if it was, I guess maybe it wasn't that long. I got to go back to the tape. But it was like, is there conflict yet? I don't know if there's conflict yet.
I just looked it up, and it was at the 22-minute mark.
22 minutes, okay. I think that's a pretty substantial chunk of time.
Yeah. A couple things on that, Brian. I think that's a great observation. I think that's kind of normal of P.T. Anderson movies. I think a lot of his movies have a first act that is essentially a prologue for what comes, and I think some of them are shorter and some of them are longer. Like One Battle After Another has a pretty substantial prologue that feels like it's the movie, and then it kind of jumps ahead. That one's different because it already feels like a movie, but I kind of with you where you're like, this is just setup, you know? I found it interesting because I thought the writing was good throughout. Like I didn't really feel like it was slow, but I kind of buy what you're saying. Here's where I will share something I read that I really liked. I think the critic was Adam Naiman, who has written a book about P.T. Anderson. It might have been someone else I was reading this week, but we can give Adam Naiman credit for it. He said he was rewatching There Will Be Blood. And when he was watching There Will Be Blood, he really focused on the daughter, the girl that the son ends up marrying, or the adopted son ends up marrying. So I forget exactly. I think it's of the preacher's little sister, maybe. But she definitely appears in like 5 scenes. And he said he felt like he totally understood the movie for the first time, thinking just about that daughter, like the way that a few different characters interact with her. He understood those characters. He understood what the movie was doing. And he said every time he watches a P.T. Anderson movie, there's something that calls out to him, whether it's a specific exchange or a specific character or a scene, that when he thinks about the rest of the movie in the context of that, it unlocks the movie for him. And I think that's an interesting idea. This is where it feels kind of authorly, where there's like a certain symbol or a certain concept that is kind of the rest of the movie is orbiting around, but it's also subjective. Like, it's, if there's a whole bunch of different ones, then obviously it's not just one, but it's like a rich enough universe that you can kind of look at all these things and they all feel like a center of gravity that the movie is built around. I think that's an art of a great writer, you know, or a hallmark of a great writer. And for me, what the second time through watching Hard Eight, the thing that reframed the entire movie for me was when Sidney is talking with Clementine and he says that he has a son and a daughter he doesn't see. It's literally like 2 or 3 throwaway lines. And I was like, oh, he's basically making John C. Reilly and Clementine his son and his daughter. And he's treating them as his kids because he doesn't have his real kids in his life. And we can maybe project he's got some regret about how he was as a dad to these 2 kids or something like that. And so you've used the word paternal, and I think that is a very good word. I think he is thinking about what it means to be a father and like what a father's role should be. And he's kind of processing that through his relationship with various characters in this film, I think is at least one way to read this movie.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's the skeleton key for the movie, because then it recontextualizes all of the dialogue that came before it, the way he takes John under his wing and coaches him and answers his questions. And he goes from the back seat to the front seat, you know, like your son would do. And then everything that comes after it, the same way. Once you unlock that parental lens, then you can map everything else onto it.
I was also thinking kind of like Oliver Twist, where you've got Fagin who teaches these street urchins to be pickpockets. Like, he's got this enterprise that he's jumping these kids into, but he's like taking care of them and he's providing them a sort of a livelihood, and they've now got this little community of family.
Yeah, I was not totally disconnected from those lines either, Brian, because I thought, well, this is where my mind always goes, but I thought, well, this is like a Christ disciple kind of thing. You know, his name's John. It's one of the early disciples of Jesus. But I always think of this scene from the Seven Samurai, where I don't even know their names, but this older samurai, you know, kind of has this King Solomon moment where he solves a tense issue in a village. And then the younger samurai falls in front of his face and he says, "Make me your disciple." It's one of my favorite moments that I haven't figured out how to make a live action meme with in my real life interactions. But it feels that way when he sees that the card scam works, and he's up in the hotel and he's just like, "Are you going down to gamble? Can I come?" You know, it's very much that mentor-mentee, teacher-disciple relationship.
So our figures here, we have Sidney, and then we have John and Clementine, and the fourth major figure is played by Samuel L. Jackson, character named Jimmy. And Jimmy is very interesting. In some ways, I thought he was just counterweight. I use that phrase sometimes, where he's not exactly like essential to the narrative, but he provides another spotlight onto the themes or the characters in a way that you would not otherwise see them. And I don't know if you would end up calling him the villain, but he's definitely antagonistic, in part because he's like the dark version of what Sidney could be, or perhaps even what Sidney fears he is on the inside, or what he could become. Because what Jimmy is yes, he also is gambling all the time, always hanging around the casinos, but he seems to be amoral. He is talking about women and their bodies, and he's like, "Oh, I don't care. They don't care, so why should I care?" He's talking about like with Glee, people like funny, quote unquote funny, like funny to him scenes of like people dying in the casino. And he's in many ways what Sydney isn't, but and also he's like a dark shadow of what Sydney is too.
Right. So he's callous and he's crass, but he's doing the same things that Sydney is doing.
Exactly.
And so he's kind of Sydney minus his pretensions. And it's like, is this all a veneer?
Right. I completely agree. And Sydney does not like Jimmy. And this time through, it really struck me that he's afraid of Jimmy because Jimmy represents the dark truth of what he is, which is like kind of pathetic. I don't know. Or at least not entirely pathetic, but like there's a way in which you could see him that he's a very sad person, I guess. I don't know.
I like that Brian uses the word veneer because it does feel like what Sydney is doing the whole movie is maintaining this composure, this posture, this presentation, and Jimmy completely disrupts that. And he walks in like he's coming from another movie. He's so great. I love Samuel L. Jackson's energy here.
He's very funny in this, yeah. And he's just got high energy. He's like 2 years off Pulp Fiction, one of the towering performances.
Yeah. Samuel L. Jackson, of course, a guy who shows up in Tarantino movies. He's also in Goodfellas, so I was thinking about that.
Wait a second.
I didn't remember him.
Samuel L. Jackson's in Goodfellas?
He's at the end of Goodfellas, isn't he? He's the guy, he's like the getaway driver who parks the car somewhere he's not supposed to, and that's how their whole robbery falls apart.
You might be right. I'm not placing it in my head.
He plays Stax Parnell, the getaway driver. He's like the one he's the first one caught, and then all the dominoes fall. It's a minor role, but he's there.
So another important aspect of this whole dynamic of these characters is that there is a unspoken rule that the Vegas waitresses, if you're like a hotshot, will be available to you for prostitution. So Clementine essentially doubles as a sex worker in addition to being a waitress. And that seems to perhaps be the way that she gets most of her money. And the very first kind of extended sequence where Sydney is taking Clementine under his wing, it's ambiguous whether he is, because we don't really know anything about Sydney. Use the word veneer. It's like we don't know what his core is. So like, is he secretly just as lascivious as Jimmy, but he hides it until it gets to the bedroom and he's going to have this really dark, horny streak? Or is he actually going to treat her with kindness? And in retrospect, it seems obvious, but when I was watching, I was like, I do not know where this is going to be going. And it seems like Clementine doesn't know either. And he ends up giving her a room to sleep in, but like she even says, I think her phrasing she uses is, do you want to fuck me? And he gets mad that she even uses that phrasing, that word, that language. So that's like another dark element on this. And I was thinking of Boogie Nights, of course, here. Particularly, I was thinking of Julianne Moore's character, how she kind of has sex so normalized in her life that it kind of throws off what is normal. Like just kind of things that would seem gratuitous and tasteless to us. It's such a part of her life, with like that being her profession, but also she's trying to be a mom and a woman in society, that it like distorts her perception, but also people's perception of her. And there's a lot of that on Clementine, even though Clementine's not a mom. That's kind of where it plays out there in Boogie Nights. But here, just this kind of character who's been in some ways reduced or distorted by the assumption of sex in her day-to-day life, I guess.
Yeah, I liked this scene a lot where he takes her into his apartment, and I'm with you, Dan. It did seem ambiguous the first time you watch it. I like that she said when he gets flustered about her question, she says, it seemed like, he says, don't let it seem like that, which is kind of just a gambler's logic, that you could control your emotions like that, or that you're in more control than than you think you are. But I like this scene for Gwyneth Paltrow because it's easy for me to forget. Now she has sort of a sour reputation somehow, and I'm not in touch with all of that or have my hand on that pulse. But it seems like her reputation is less connected to her acting and to her work, and more with other business ventures or whatever pop culture business is going on. But here she really reminded me a lot of Natasha Kinski in from Paris, Texas. And there was even one shot in the bedroom, a close up of her with her posture that I thought may even be quoting it exactly. But there's a lot of magic with her in this movie. I think she brings a lot of presence to the role.
Yeah, I was thinking it reminded me a little bit of Royal Tenenbaums, her performance in that, because right, this is a couple years before it, but she has this ability to have like she's obviously a very pretty woman, but she kind of has this darkness to her eyes, like this
literally she's got a lot of that mascara going, eyeshadow.
That's true. In both movies she wears a lot of eyeshadow, so maybe that's just what I'm thinking of. But this sort of like this, you get the sense that she's got this inner darkness to her without it really kind of coming to the surface. And yeah, I like this performance too. Like I said, I just saw her in Mr. Ripley, which she's doing something different there too, but she's good in that also. Not entirely different, honestly. There's connective threads. She kind of she's wounded in all of these performances that I'm talking about. But one thing that happens is the next day, I think it's immediately the next day. The time jumps are sometimes a little bit confusing in this, but we see John, who seems to have a good rapport with Clementine, and maybe they're even dating. I'm not sure. But at this point, the timeline was a little unclear, but they start hitting it off. And in fact, Sydney's encouraging them to hit it off, which kind of throws a little bit in a wrench of like my son and my daughter, but only sort of.
Yeah, I thought about that.
In a broader sense, a son and a daughter, like the sons and daughters of God or something.
Or even a daughter-in-law,
Yeah. It's like the Michael Scott quote at the end of his one cameo at the end of the series where he's like, it's like I'm a parent and all my little kids grew up and are all marrying each other. I was thinking of that.
Every parent's dream.
Yeah. And so Sydney sends them off to have a day on the town to do something other than be in this kind of depressing gambling world where Clementine has this kind of dark reality to her everyday life. And this is where we get another PTA staple that he established here that is in many of his movies, which is some actor just comes in and knocks your socks off for one scene. And to the point that when the movie podcast called The Big Picture, they did a podcast episode where they do these things that are like drafts where they pick things in different categories. And they did a PTA character draft. So characters from the movies. And one of their categories was single scene stealer because he has so many of them throughout his career. Anyways, we talked about Alfred Molina and Boogie Nights, which I think is the best out of all of his single scene stealers. The guy where he's in the room with the firecrackers going off, Brian.
Yep.
And here it's Philip Seymour Hoffman, pretty young Philip Seymour Hoffman. I don't know if this was his breakout role or not. Oh my God, Philip Seymour Hoffman is incredible for one scene as a craps player, encouraging Sydney to gamble, and Sydney bites. He puts a lot of money on the hard 8. I don't know anything about craps. I don't know what this means. I think he needed to get a 4 and a 4, but I thought this was a terrific scene, and Philip Seymour Hoffman was very funny in it. Very good too.
This was one of the scenes that kind of solidified what I had been thinking about through a lot of this, about there being a lot of Western tropes in it. Whenever I see a stoic, kind of in control character, my mind goes there just subconsciously, easily enough. But this is something that happens in Westerns all the time. We've got your primary gunslinger, and he's in the saloon where there's gambling going on anyway. And then there's just this young hot shot that's heard of this guy who has a reputation for being the fastest gun, and he wants to just rag them. That's what I felt like was going on here. This was a good scene. I was surprised. I was confused by the mechanics of the scene, like you trying to figure out what a hard eight was and all of that, and then finding that I mean, apparently he lost, but they both lost, I think.
Right.
So it was an interesting scene.
This is another scene I feel like you could use as like the thing that unlocks the movie, because it's almost like he's seen his id or something like that, like some unleashed inner version of himself.
That's good.
In Philip Seymour Hoffman's wild, like erratic gambler guy. And then when he loses, like the sort of sadness and defeat on him, on his face.
I read it that he's kind of testing Sidney. Sidney, again, has got this restraint to him. And, like, what would happen if the restraint falls away? Because Philip Seymour Hoffman is not at all restrained.
Right.
He's just a crazy young buck here to paint the town red, I guess. And maybe like Samuel L. Jackson, he may see the crack. He may see through this surface layer of Sidney.
Notably, this is the last scene before we get to what I think Brian would call the actual conflict of the movie.
It's like, finally, yes! The fireworks factory.
We're at the fireworks factory at last. And what happens is Sidney gets a call in the middle of the night, and it's John C. Reilly. And this is what you were saying, Mitch, how you can view everything as like, this is how a dad would treat a kid and vice versa. It's like the teen kid calling his dad, being like, Dad, I got in trouble. Please don't be mad. Can you come pick me up? And except what he does is he's like, you need to come help me. And so Sidney goes to a motel where John is, and John is reluctant to open the door. He's like, you promise you'll help me and you won't be mad? And he's like, just let me in. And he's like, okay, who's this guy here? And we see that there's a bloody guy on the bed. It's like, okay, what's going on here?
Handcuffed to the bed, just bleeding profusely from the head.
It's so absurd and black comic. I was just laughing as soon as we get in there. And except we don't even see him right away. What we see is John C. Reilly's face. And he's saying, Sidney's saying, who's this guy? And he says, well, he's a hostage. The delivery of this, I just could not stop laughing. And he starts crying, and he's like, oh, it's so good. And obviously it's like this terrible thing has happened, but it's just John C. Reilly is just so good at making this funny. But yes, what's happened is they talk through the timeline some. I'm still a little bit confused exactly what it is, but Clementine solicited a man at this casino, had a sexual encounter with him, and then the man wouldn't pay, and Clementine lost her cool. So they handcuffed him to the bed and pistol whipped him a bunch of times. And now they're like, well, what do we do? How do we get out of this? And it like a few more it's like a thing where like the kids will like admit one more thing that went wrong about it. Like when they're getting pressed by the parents, like one more thing comes out. It's like, well, we did call the wife. Well, we did threaten to kill him if he doesn't pay us $300. Well, we did call Jimmy and Jimmy gave us a gun. It's like, oh my God. So it's obviously like the dark, violent thing is happening, but it's also the funniest scene in the movie. And I was deeply admiring PTA's ability to make this both funny and like the momentum shifter, you know? And Clementine is being very obstinate. He needs to pay me. And for her, I was thinking about this, like, why does she care so much? Because in some ways it's kind of like her dignity, you know? It's like the way that she proves her worth. Otherwise, she's nothing. if she doesn't even get paid for this, why is she doing this debasing thing, you know? But Brian, what were you thinking about this scene?
Everything you're saying is correct. Like, this was it firing on all cylinders. And
Yeah.
I like how they did the reveal of the phone call coming in of like, okay, well, was he in a car accident? What exactly happened here? And then, yeah, goes into the room and still doesn't quite show you everything until they have a little bit more conversation. And just the the whole energy of John C. Reilly just being this dopey, well-meaning guy who has just pistol whipped a hostage is, yes, dark but very funny.
This scene has so much in it that I'm really interested in. One of my favorite pieces of writing, film writing specifically, that occurs in this scene is when the guy's stirring and starting to get a little belligerent, and then John hits him over the head again, and he turns to Sydney and he says, "Right?" And and then all the way at the end of the scene, when he starts to stir again, Sydney clubs him over the head and says, "Right." And I thought, oh my goodness, that's just a great bit of film writing, kind of keeping your cards close to your chest. But also, I like what you're questioning here, Dan, about why it means so much to Clementine. And she says something like, because he thought I was stupid and I'm not. And that's something she's already brought up with Sydney, like, you must think I'm an idiot. So it's something that's very much on her mind. And I like how he finally evens out, Sydney does, and starts to talk her down after John's basically unsuccessful attempt. And then he does straight up name drop "My Darling Clementine," which I thought was a nice touch, a nice garnish. And, we talked about the movie, which just adds to the Western stuff that I think is going on here. The John Ford movie about winning the West and sort of maybe this mentality or this archetype that Sidney's adopted for himself of a tortured person who can't stay in one place anymore, but has to kind of keep drifting because of his past. But he's still able to solve problems because of the type of person that he is. But also the song, it's originally a song, right? A folk song, "My Darling Clementine." And that song is specifically about a miner, I think. What is a gambler, if not a miner, just kind of chips away towards some kind of means and some kind of wealth. So I just thought there's so much good stuff going on in this scene, the humor and the climactic notes that you guys pointed out.
And another thing comes out. So Sydney is talking to Clementine about what's going on. We need to get out of here. We need to leave this bad situation. This is actually the moment I was thinking of the wolf from Pulp Fiction. I solve problems.
He's a cleaner. He cleans up. They bring him in once a crime has happened, and he can get people out of the mess.
Yep.
Right.
Which is also what Mike on Breaking Bad does.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, so what he's doing here is like, okay, here's what we can do, the way that we're most likely to get out of this scenario. And they are losing their cool a little bit. They like push each other around. At one point, John hits Clementine, which I think is worthwhile to show that these are not saints, they're people losing their cool. But one thing that comes out is they got married that day. He's like, we got married. Like, did you really get married? Yes, we did. Here's a videotape of it. And I was like, okay, this scene is just taking another twist. It's like, it's just very bizarre. And this is where I'll name drop That Thing You Do, because my favorite Vegas wedding surprise is in That Thing You Do, when it smash cuts to Lenny having suddenly gotten married to the secretary at the Playtone office. And he says, "I'm so happy." And to the people who are at the wedding, he gives them some gambling chips. And it's Steve Zahn doing his impeccable line delivery in that.
Now I just got all three matching images on the goods slot machine.
Breaking Bad, That Thing You Do. Is there a third one?
Shoot, I didn't complete my metaphor.
That's all right. But it was good because it was gambling related. You got a jackpot. Basically Sydney's like, all right, just go drive somewhere far away and be a happy married couple. Just get this awful place, awful crime, this stink, this terrible life that you have off of you, leave and go somewhere. And they settle on Niagara Falls, which I think we talked about Niagara Falls as like kind of an old fashioned honeymoon destination in our discussion of It Happened One Night. But I like that as an image of like John C. Reilly driving to Niagara Falls, like running away from having pistol whipped a guy in a hotel room.
We just talked Sweeney Todd, and I was thinking about where things stand near the end with Anthony and Joanna, where Anthony's like, we'll go off together and everything will be happy. And it's like, how do you figure? It's like, where are you going to go and what are you going to do?
Yeah.
A little bit of history repeating itself, I think, though. This is how he was able to solve his issue, which we haven't gotten to really yet.
That's a great point. I didn't even make that connection.
The country, just running away, it's the only thing to do, so he says.
And we kind of slowly watch this escape unfold. Here it's almost like a mini thriller. They need to just drop the gun, drop the loot, get in the car, drive away. And then he says goodbye to them. And we see them driving off and looking a little bit sad. And they decide they don't want to get their marriage annulled, which I thought was sweet. And then we see one of the saddest but sweetest moments in the movie, which is Sydney watching the wedding tape of the two of them with this look on his face, this sort of inscrutable look. He's sad. It's like he's watching his kids get, wedding that he missed. And especially once you start thinking about it as he's kind of adopted these as his kids, it's both the simultaneous sadness that he missed it, but the happiness that they found love kind of enigmatically on this actor's face, I thought was a very nice moment.
I agree.
Then we jump ahead some period in time and we get to the other shoe that needs to drop. And I was glad that we had with this last sequence, because you wonder, even through all of that, what is Sydney's deal? Why is he so caring? How could a man who's in an area so rampant with crime and degeneracy have this veneer of wholesomeness? And so we get this answer, which is that Jimmy pulls him aside and is like, hey, you did a good job dealing with what was going on with John and Clementine. Also, I know some stuff about you. When you were in Atlantic City, and it very slowly comes out that he, being Sydney, killed a man, and that man was John's father. And that is why he is so caring for John. Well, you know what? It doesn't even directly say that, I gotta say. What we learn is that Jimmy figured out that Sydney killed John's father, and he's going to carry that as a way of potentially blackmailing or manipulating Sydney going forward. And I think we infer some things, which is that this is why Sydney has taken such a liking to John. It's caring for him so much. But it's also, I don't know, you sort of get more of Sydney, but you also still don't fully know exactly what's making him tick. So what are you thinking about Sydney as these revelations are coming out, Mitch?
Well, I was pretty torn on this reveal. It seems like Sydney just happens on this guy, and then they give us this late stage plot twist. But what I like that it does is it repositions Sydney as somebody who is in need of redemption. And I don't know how much mileage you guys have for things like this. I know, in English classes, in writing classes in high school and college, sometimes your teacher is droning on about how a color means something, and you're like, maybe it's just green in The Great Gatsby, no big deal. But, I think about their names. John is God is gracious historically, and Clementine, clemency, etymologically there. He needs atonement for what he's done, and he's finding that in investing in the lives of these two young people. Again, to what Dan pointed out with the skeleton key there of his having in some way failed his own children, not being in contact with them. Uh, you almost think that that would have been enough. So I'm a little bit torn about this plot twist. I think it does help to drive home the Western trope of this guy being a dangerous man who can't ever fully integrate into society, but has to keep kind of roaming. The best thing he can do in terms of being a good man is to go from town to town and make sure other people's hands don't get bloodied in the ways that his will always be.
I think you raise a really good point about how it's a kind of unnecessary contrivance, because it is kind of appealing how John is just this bum that he happens upon and takes under his wing. But I also kind of agree with what you said. And another thing I like about it is that it's a direct threat to a father's children and a father's relationship with his children, if you view Sidney as this sort of father figure for John and Clementine. And in that regard, like, it both shows him as being darker, but also really challenging him to act in a twisted sort of love, I guess, even, or like protectiveness of this relationship that he has. Because what Jimmy offers is this sort of threat to his relationship with them, but also like this ever lingering baggage about the darkness that Sidney wants to avoid. And so it kind of fills that role really well, although I do agree it is a contrivance.
The one thing I might say, just from a personal note, I guess, I do like this notion of them cranking the volume all the way up in terms of what would be the thing that a dad would be horrified that their children would find out about them hyperbolizing that to the nth degree. Will my children someday find out who I was and who I've been and what I've done and who I've hurt, and will they ever be able to reckon with that? That's the last thing I want. Now being a dad, thinking about, every little decision I've made now right back in front of my face, kind of staring back at me across the table. Like, will you be able to stomach that about your old man? I always think of that. Maybe this is the biggest thing that I remember about, why am I bringing this up? The Patriot with Mel Gibson, that opening monologue. I have long feared that my sins would return to visit me, and the cost is more than I can bear. So in that way, just subjectively, even though objectively, I think maybe it's a script misstep, I do like that it's there.
It worked for me. This reveal that this is what has been motivating him all along, is to kind of redeem himself, provide a path forward for John, that he feels responsible for John. So it worked for me. And it solidified for me that this was Sidney's story, which up to this point I was wondering, well, I suppose by like the halfway point I knew, okay, well, this is really about Sidney.
Right.
But from the first shot of the movie, I wasn't sure. Was it going to be about Sidney or was it going to be about John? And definitely Sidney is the main character.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point. And one fact about this movie is that Anderson wanted to call it Sidney. He wanted to name the movie Sidney, but the studio said, no one's going to know what that is. So Hard 8.
As if we know what Hard 8 is.
Exactly, yeah. But it at least, I think it texturally, it's like Sydney. First of all, it's like it could be a man's name or a woman's name. And secondly, like that's also the name of a city.
Yeah, it could be an Australian movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, Heart Eight's a better title.
I kind of agree. I think it is a better title. And it kind of,
For sure.
it makes you question, what is the heart eight? What is the gamble here? You know? And it's just evocative. But the way this movie ends, though, is it gets pushed even further because it's kind of left in a stasis with Jimmy. And then we go and we see that Sydney has a conversation with John. And then we see him drive a car through a dark street, go into a house that we don't know whose house it is at first, although we can guess, pull out a gun, sit waiting at a door for Jimmy to come. And then we kind of eventually cross-cut it with Jimmy gambling to come home with one of the waitresses, or someone that he met at the casino. And the second time through, I was struck by, especially when you start thinking about like a father angle for Sydney, that the image of the dad waiting up for someone to come home.
That's good.
Is one that I've encountered before. I mean, I've lived through before as the son, not as the dad yet. Probably I will as the dad at some point. But sitting as it's dark, you're ready to go to sleep, just staring at the door, waiting for your kid to walk in the door, or for whoever you're waiting for to come home. It's like a domestic image, not a gambling image, not a violence image, until it is suddenly violent, of course.
Well, that's very funny because you're just making me think of the trope of the dad sitting with like a shotgun across his lap on the porch, when his daughter's on a date. Maybe that's a distinctly Southeast America trope, but
no, there's something there. Yeah.
I like that you're pulling it up.
And when Jimmy walks in and Sydney doesn't even fire right away. He waits like, I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute. And Jimmy's like making out with this girl that he brought and like starting to undress her. And then he starts firing bullets into him, not into her. He lets her go. He says, "Get out of here," or something like that. And then we cut to the final scene of the movie, the epilogue. I think it's the same coffee shop from the start. I could be wrong. Sydney walks in, gets a cup of coffee, is sitting and thinking about what he's done, and he looks down and he sees a little blood spatter on his shirt, kind of driving it all home. I don't know. It's a striking image. It makes you think.
Yeah, he's working on closing all the loose ends. So got to get rid of Samuel L. Jackson, and now got to get rid of this blood stain.
My favorite bit in the credits is that there are 3 people who are listed as the, quote, pants on fire people. I assume that those are either the actors in that cutaway or people who helped with the stunt effect in that. But I had it rolling and I was like, pants on fire people. That's pretty good.
The liars.
There you go. Yeah, we can wrap it up there. So that was Heart 8. All right, Brian, so tell us about One Battle After Another.
Okay, so I watched One Battle After Another after Dan had hyped it up as, definitely like front runner for Best Picture winner. And okay, when you put this movie on, the first shot of the movie is blowing a hole in Trump's border wall. So it is not subtle with the politics at all. And the second shot is like, it's a pregnant black woman with the stock of a machine gun up against her stomach, like rattling the interracial baby inside. So like the first chunk of this movie is just like as in your face progressive politics as it could be. And then it kind of changes a little bit after like, 30 or 40 minutes to a more conventional action picture where it's like all kind of one extended chase scene. And they're chasing after Leonardo DiCaprio, who was like the husband of this woman, and it was almost like he decided he wasn't about the aggressive activist life, but now he's kind of gotten pulled back into the scene again. And so I don't know. It was definitely like trying to be of the moment, but then it's based on a novel that to me makes more sense because I think it was like a novel in 1990 about somebody who had experienced the 70s and had been involved with, the activism and the violence of the 70s. And to transpose that and like kind of graft it onto now, it starts with this flashback to 16 years ago. So was this going on during the Obama administration? It's like, when was this? And then because they also kind of avoid saying specific names, like they never say Trump in this movie. So I was trying to place things, and everybody has like crazy cartoon names. And so it was kind of like Dr. Strangelove, where everybody has a really strange name, but that was like very rooted in a specific moment in time, whereas this felt kind of unmoored. It was like they're doing the thing in the Civil War movie that A24 made, where it's like, we want to comment on what's happening now, but we're not going to name any specific names. And so it was like specific, but not. And it's like, when is this happening? Who are these people? Like, are they one-to-one with real organizations? I followed it better once the focus was more on Leo. And I did have to commend the production all throughout. Like, anytime they were doing something in a car or any of the stunts were very well executed. There's a funny scene where he falls 40 feet off a building and he like lands in an alley. He like scrapes down a tree and lands in an alley and then picks himself up and runs toward the camera. And I was trying to figure out how they did it, because I feel like he must have done the stunt, because it was like a Tom Cruise Mission Impossible stunt, because I was like, I don't know how they could have cut around it. They must have had Leo do a significant portion of this.
Except it's a Tom Cruise stunt, except he's face planting cartwheel off of a building into a tree, instead of being like a cool guy jumping off of a skyscraper. So I could do a whole other podcast on this movie. I think it's very provocative. A couple of reactions to what you said. I think some of the things that you said it does very intentionally.
Oh, I think it's an exceptionally intentional film. I mean, it's trying to be in your face to the point that I wondered if it was a parody of itself. Like, the way that this handles politics, I almost felt like Zombies level. Like,
but specifically, I mean, I even think some of the storytelling things you're talking about, like 16 years pass, but it feels like a weekend passes, if not for the ages of a couple of people. I think the idea, like, the world doesn't change because nothing gets done. And I think you're onto something when you say it's an element of parody. So there's a character played by Benicio del Toro who is like the total contrast of the group. He's in a freedom fighter in his own way, but in exactly the opposite way of the group that we meet at the beginning. And I think it's almost like Mitch said this earlier, that PTA has gotten a little more cynical, or I don't think you used that word, but I use that word. And like, I know that his politics lean left in general, like many people in Hollywood, but I think here he was like dealing with complicated feelings about like things like, I forget what it's called. It's French. There's a number that they call themselves, this group.
75.
That does like these big, exaggerated, violent outbursts and nothing changes. So like, what was the point? You know, whereas you have Benicio del Toro, who's like quietly helping these kids live productive lives behind the scenes. And in fact, like, the crazy action is making it harder for him to do those things, you know? So I think it's the fact that it is brazenly political, but I don't think I would say it's more nuanced or like complicated about like what it's saying is good than just like the people we see at the beginning are the good guys, you know?
Right. And there's a character that Leo talks to over the phone who's like gatekeeping the passwords and things. He's like, you can't get in unless you know the passwords, and it's been like 20 years since Leo was involved, so he can't think of it. And then finally he is able to muscle through and get in with the organization again, and then he confronts this dude who was keeping him out. And he's like, where are you? Tell me where you are. And the guy on the phone is like, well, I'm somewhere between the stolen land of the Wabash and the stolen land of the Chickasaw. And just kind of, highlighting the kind of absurdity of some of these performative aspects.
Yeah, I like that scene because it felt like a drawn line to the difficult customer service call from Punch Drunk Love. But
yes,
I connect with a lot of what you guys are saying. I like this quote I saw laying around, and I didn't, do due diligence on citing it, but Anderson was quoted as saying about the movie when he was asked it, basically in conversation with how it was inspired by another film. So to the extent that he may have been talking about that film too, but he said it's about how the things we do and believe when we're young can haunt us for the rest of our lives. And I just see that as something that shows up again and again in his movies. I think it was here when Jimmy, he said, you think you can walk through this life without being punished for it, to Sydney. And then, of course, in Magnolia, his magnum opus, you may be done with the past, but the past is not done with you. I love that through line in his work. I think it's really powerful.
right. Yeah, you see that a lot for sure. One thing that I wanted to say before, we've already been talking a lot here, is that one reason I think this has a shot at reaching a wide audience and getting awards recognition is because, like Brian said, I think it's one of his more conventional narratives once you get past the prologue. Because one thing that I don't know if we've explicitly said is that another thing about P.T. Anderson is that he doesn't use... all of his movies have something askew about their structure to varying degrees. Like The Master in particular is like a one long noodle almost to me. Whereas, okay, Punch Drunk Love it's kind of a rom-com in shape, but it like upside downs everything. This one to me, it does some of the sort of messing with stuff, but it's particularly once you get past that opening act, it has the feel of like a more traditional action flick. And in that ways, I think it's kind of more accessible and more conventional than some of his other ones. But it sounds like I was probably higher on it than at least you, Brian. And Mitch, I recall you being relatively mixed on it, at least in the realm of PTA.
It's growing on me. It's one of those great experiences where some of the discourse after the film really elevates it for you. So it's been fun long after the film credits roll.
Oh, that's another thing about PTA is another quote I read this week. It might have been Naaman or it might have been someone else, is that I forget. I want to know what the exact phrasing was because I liked it. It was PTA's movies are rewatchers or like play better on rewatch or something like that, which makes me curious to go back. There's always things to revisit when you go and watch his movies again. But
yeah, I'm not a big rewatch guy, but I have seen all of my top 3 Andersons like a half dozen times. So,
and do you feel it's always well worth going back to?
For sure. And yeah, like I like this author that you name dropped earlier, and I think it's like for One Battle After Another, I'm probably still looking for that linchpin thing to zero in on. So I like the idea, this myth that he created out of thin air, that there's something like that in all of Anderson's movies.
For me, it was the Benicio del Toro character, like reframing what does it mean to be
I see that, yeah.
an activist. But anything else you wanted to add, Brian, before we moved on?
since you watched all the films in the corpus, in the filmography, Dan, is there one you wanted to focus on?
I would say the one that feels most like a lark is Inherent Vice. So here he's just doing a hard-boiled noir riff, and it's the other one that's by this author, Thomas Pynchon, or I don't know how you say it either. I haven't read anything by him, but it really just feels like it almost feels like a Hunter S. Thompson story. Like this, it's kind of got this trippy element to it. I was kind of surprised it's got this warmth to it too, despite it being like a murder mystery. Not as warm as like Licorice Pizza, which is the coming of age comedy, but I don't know. That's the one I felt in some ways the most ambivalent about, just because it's really long, but almost all the scenes are good, but there's just too many of them and they don't really fit together. So I was a little mixed on that one, but I already talked a lot about my thoughts on all of them, so I don't need to go in deep on any other ones. But Mitch, maybe just tell us one or two more things about I guess you watched, what is it called? Cigarettes and Coffee?
Either that or Coffee and Cigarettes. Sorry, but yeah, I think it's really good. They say that I'm not sure if this was really about coffee and cigarettes or if it was about Heart 8 or if they just kind of merge into each other. But they say that it was financed in part by Anderson gambling, which I thought is just a nice myth, even if it's not entirely true. You know, they kind of trace the ways that he was able to fund this whole enterprise in a way that I liked, because I just like the concept that people could cobble some money together and make something like Aronofsky with Pi, or who was it that did Primer, Shane Carruth. Always like those shoestring budget fairy tales. But there's a lot of just little notes in this. Is basically there's a couple of guys having a conversation. One of them is in fact Philip Baker Hall. He told him that he had written this short script for him and talked him into doing it while he was like an assistant on another picture that Hall was on. And so again, I don't exactly see what Hall saw in it. Maybe he just saw something in Anderson himself. But and you know, when I see cigarettes in movies, I think student film. It feels like every student film I ever saw is like somebody's popping on a cigarette or about to kill themselves or something. It's just there's these little tropes. So that contributed to my feelings of ambivalence towards it. But there were some really nice notes. I like Hall's character keeps talking about making sense of the matter. He's coaching someone that's not John C. Reilly, but is kind of that same type of character. And everybody in the picture is connected through this one $20 bill. So it's got some Magnolia notes to it. And one thing that I really liked is he went out of his way to refer to a cup of coffee and a cigarette as our bonfires for today. And it makes me think back to what you were saying earlier about how P.T. Anderson is the guy that's offering us a cigarette and a cup of coffee. He's the guy that's kind of preparing this bonfire, this moving picture for us that we can gather around and look at together or warm ourselves by. And that gives me a good feeling. So not much to it. There's a bad copy on YouTube, and it's just worth watching for the backstory, I guess.
It's definitely cool to see how directors' shorts get turned into their first feature.
You said it.
Well, I think the time has come to put ourselves in position for the Is It Good score. As Mitch has quoted a couple times on the Discord.
Mitch, what's your working theory? What's the position that you strike?
Yeah, well, obviously nobody listening to this can see any position that I would get in. So just imagine me in the most contortionist position imaginable. No, I like to think about that line. It's so funny.
Is It Good is our signature section where we each give the movie a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from a very not good, which is a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating, toward a good, which is an 8 out of 8. Brian, is Hard 8 good?
As we've talked about it here tonight, it's risen in my estimation. I'm going to give this a 6 out of 8, a very good. I do like it. I think it takes too long to get going. So this is a 6 that just barely verges into the territory. Because what's here I like, and like even the first part I like. I like the writing, I like the cast, I like the gags, the pocket exploding scene was very funny. But until the phone call comes that kind of changes everything, like that's quite a ways into the runtime. And before that, I wasn't quite sure, okay, well, what are we getting at here? What's it about? Who's even the main character? But I like the vibe all throughout. And I certainly see some connections to Boogie Nights, which, checking in with the other Paul Thomas Andersons I watched, they definitely had a different feel. Okay, where are you guys at?
Well, I really don't have a lot of negative things to say about this. It doesn't feel as tight and as well constructed as his whole dead gone string of masterpieces that come after that. But there were moments where I felt it was a little student filmy, and I have a hard time using that as a derogatory way because I love student films. But I think it does just to say that there's a little bit of amateurness to it, for better and worse. Something, about John's dad being killed kind of felt a little blindsiding. Wasn't always totally clear to me why this setting was in a casino, or set in the world of gambling. But it definitely establishes that setting, a precariousness, a liminality, which is a necessary mood for what story there is. I love the interactions with the Western tropes, the gambler tropes, the themes of making wrongs right, especially in a parental framework, like the nods to discipleship. I love Philip Baker Hall. He's flawless. John C. Reilly cutting his teeth. Paltrow, incandescent. Jackson, terrifying. PTA, and Arrival. I'm going to give it a 6. I can't imagine myself going lower than a 6 on the show for anything, just because it's so cool to be here talking about movies with you guys. I don't think it would go to a 7 or an 8, because while there aren't just any glaring negatives to me, it doesn't resonate to the personal level that I think it would take to bring me to a 7 or an 8. But I'll give it a 6.
Then where does it land for you, Dan?
So I came in on the fence between a 6 and a 7, a very good and an exceptionally good, leaning towards a 6. And I think that is where I'm going to land. I'm going to give this a very good, but an upper end very good, for a couple reasons. Well, I just kind of want to echo what Mitch said, which is that I really enjoyed myself and I didn't really have too many complaints. And I think you can nitpick, but I think it works as a movie. And I see what you're saying, Brian, about like it takes a while for the thing to happen. But I actually kind of like that about it personally, because I like that we have this section where we just are kind of getting to know the characters, but it's interesting enough that it doesn't just feel like we're treading water. Like it feels like we're kind of being pulled into these people's lives and their worlds in an interesting sort of way, which is sort of also what you said too. I'm not really disagreeing with you, but I don't know. I kind of like the energy there. And then I think that also made the jarring switch more striking, because it wasn't at where you'd expect the inciting incident to be. It's like very close to the middle of the movie when that happens, which is kind of interesting. And I also agree with you, Mitch, that I think the biggest thing against it is that, you think of P.T. Anderson, you think of these like really ambitious in one way or another films, whether it's huge cast of characters, whether it's this magnificent and striking visuals, this sprawling story. And this one is just much more focused and it feels a little bit smaller. But in some ways, that also makes it more charming because it's like, I don't know, there's no pretentiousness about it. It's just like a nice little character story where we get all these little interesting wrinkles on the characters and ways you can look at them. And it's just very entertaining. So yeah, I'm on the 6-7 border. I also thought of
6-7.
Oh no, I can't believe I've done this. Oh my God. Cancel the podcast. No, but I thought of the film. Have either of you seen the film Sexy Beast from 2000?
No, I feel like I've seen one of his movies. Who's that?
It's Jonathan Glazer who did
Yes, Under the Skin.
yeah, and he did the Best Picture nominee last year or the year before was
Oh, right.
about the Nazi camp.
Yeah,
Zone of Interest.
there you go.
Yes, yeah. But he made this one like just sort of crime heist movie before he got like really weird with form. And I was thinking of that too, because that's also like a heist movie with money involved and stuff. That one's more explicitly about crime, but it's got some of the same energy of like someone just doing a story to kind of get going. I ended up giving that one a 7, but it's in a similar, like it could be either boat. So anyways, I like this one a lot. I think it's very good. I don't know how I would rank his movies. Like I said, part of my reaction finishing each one is I need to think more about it. I need to see it again. I need to process it more. I don't know what to think about it. And this one I do feel I'm able to process, and a upper end 6 feels right. So yeah, it's been a crash course on PTA for me this week. Watching There Will Be Blood and then The Master, like on a Friday morning right after Thanksgiving, was certainly a choice. It was like not the normal way to watch those movies, but it set a certain ambitious mood for the day and dark mood to the day. But I don't know. I was grateful to finally fully see his movies and know a little bit more about this director, although I feel like I have a long way to go before I fully understand him. So there we have it. Brian, any parting thoughts for us?
Sure. I was wondering, did you want to put ratings on the other movies that you watched?
I don't. I get why There Will Be Blood is considered in aggregate rankings his highest, most beloved film, because in some ways it's the most ambitious and it's like tackling kind of like the most broadest and universal themes in some ways, or like at least the most American. I don't know, because you could say that about Magnolia too. But I guess my overall takeaway is I get why every PTA lover has their favorite, because as Mitch said early on, he tries to make every movie its own unique masterpiece. And even if not every bit of that lands every time, I admire that. And yeah, so I would say most of his movies fall in the upper end 5, 6, 7. I would consider giving a couple borderline masterpiece ratings, but I'd need to think about them because I had some, I just didn't know how to react to them. So I don't know. But I like pretty much all of his movies. So Mitch, you said your big 3 are which again? Magnolia, that's Stretch, right?
Yeah, Magnolia, There Will Be Blood, and Punch Drunk Love, and then a pretty wide gap before I start even thinking about the rest of it.
Okay. And Brian, you're a Boogie Nights man.
I love Boogie Nights. Boogie Nights, one of my favorite movies. It's in the top half of my top 100. I really like that one. And yeah, I don't know. The other ones I've checked out so far, didn't like as much. Probably my second favorite would be Punch Drunk Love of what I've seen. I did like that one. And also, I was kind of confused by There Will Be Blood. I need to watch it again. My thinking was I wasn't sure what character I was supposed to like identify with and see as a good guy in There Will Be Blood, because Daniel Day-Lewis was a nasty guy, and then Paul Dano was like a wimpy guy, like a weirdo preacher dude who I wasn't sure like what his angle was on the whole thing. Like he wasn't assertive, or I don't know.
Paul Dano playing a weirdo. Who would have thunk?
Just give me the blood.
I think you might have hit it, Brian, that there's no ethical consumption in capitalism.
That old saying.
Mm-hmm. So, Brian, what are we going to be doing next week?
Okay, Dan, I need a minute here to explain a high concept episode.
Oh, boy.
Okay, so this is the time of year, early December, when we often tackle Charles Dickens's novella, A Christmas Carol. And at this point, we've talked about 4 adaptations every single year, and we've done 5 years so far. So we've talked 20 Christmas carols, Dan. That's a lot. But as our guest Ben Stanley taught us, there are many, many more adaptations out there. And I don't even just want to talk A Christmas Carol. We've kind of done A Christmas Carol, obviously. We've talked it. We've tread those beats. And so one of the times we talked about it, you mentioned that one of your favorite movies, Dan, It's a Wonderful Life, is in some ways in communication with A Christmas Carol. That it's a spiritual intervention that prompts the protagonist to reassess their life at Christmas time. So our main focus, I want to be It's a Wonderful Life, Dan. And we'll talk about similarities, differences. Why does that story resonate with us? Why, at this time of year, do we reevaluate our lives and where we stand with the people around us? But because I think the people, like Mitch, those who appreciate the goods as a show, they're going to want some Christmas Carol coverage, Dan. And so I have prepared Christmas Carol roulette. So, Dan, if you join me, and we'll pull the trigger a couple times and see what happens, because I have prepared a spinner wheel. I'm going to hit share screen on the Zoom meeting here now. And I've made a spinner wheel that has 115 Christmas carols that we've not covered yet.
Dear God.
It's everything from Ben Stanley's master list, plus all the television show episodes that I brought into consideration last year when we talked TV episodes. And so right now, are you looking at a spinner wheel?
I'm looking at this ungodly spinner wheel.
All right. 115 sliver-sized pie slices.
It's enough slices, Brian.
All right. So, Dan, my thought was we usually cover 4, so I thought we each pull the trigger twice. So I'm drawing for you now, Dan.
All right, draw for me.
Okay, so you've been assigned Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol from 2012. So let me write this.
I've heard of all of those words, but not in that specific combination.
Let me make sure I write this down. All right, I'm spinning once for me. Okay, I got Carry On Christmas from 1969. Some of these I'm just trusting their adaptations because they were on Ben's list.
I've never even heard of that. Yeah. Let's see if it actually is. Right.
This is brilliant.
All right. Second spin for Dan. Okay, we got an episode of The Catherine Tate Show from 2009 titled Nan's Christmas Carol.
Okay. Is Catherine Tate, is she like that comedian who was on The Office?
I have no idea.
Yes, I was struggling for the name.
Okay.
Okay, one more spin for me.
Is the porn parody on here, Brian?
All right. I drew Ebenezer from 1998.
Oh, is that the Western one?
I think so.
Nice.
All right.
A Western Christmas Carol? That's cool.
Dude, there's every Christmas Carol under the sun.
I see that now. I've never seen that so clearly.
Okay. So my thought is that the big ticket item is It's a Wonderful Life. And then we're each going to kind of do little book report blurbs on these Christmas carols we're watching.
Sounds good. Well, this should be fun, Brian. And Mitch, thank you very much for joining us. And we're going to be talking your number 1 movie next week.
I can't wait.
You just had your top 25 movies list, and this was at number 1.
Yeah, Christmas came early.
And up there for Sam as well, if I recall.
That's right.
That's exciting.
Anything else you'd like to say? about you or your podcast or the inner workings of your brain?
No, I've been excited to listen to this show, and it's brought me a lot of joy. There's a lot of film podcasts out there, but I'm telling anybody that's listening, and you're probably already sold on it, but it's something special, and it was just so cool to be on here. So thank you guys.
I appreciate your generosity and spirit and in time for listening, Mitch, as well as for you listeners. Thank you as always for joining us on The Goods, a film podcast.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mitch.